So the starting point is going to be that in this week's Torah portion, we talk about the concept of the division of the land of Israel to the Jewish people. And it talks about the idea that the Jewish people, the way they get the land is there would be there's actually a few methods. There's a lottery. In other words, there's different tribes. Each tribe gets a specific portion. And which portion does each tribe get? Well, the Torah says through lottery. On the other hand, there's indication that, well, a larger tribe with more people needs a larger section of Israel. So we said, well, the lottery turned out, miraculously, the lottery turned out that the larger tribe received the larger portion of land. Okay, so it worked out. Then we read other sources, and it talks about the notion that, well, every person has an inheritance. We inherit the land of Israel. So what we're basically going to try to get to from a philosophical, mystical perspective is that our relationship with Israel has three dimensions. And that's why we talk about lottery. We talk about logic. If a larger tribe should get a larger portion. And we talk about inheritance, which is really the key, what we're trying to get to. And what we're going to get to is that our relationship with Israel is a reflection of our relationship with God. Our relationship with God also has those three dimensions. And the greatest dimension is the dimension of inheritance. And these are that we want to explore a little bit. Part of this is going to be, and I guess I'll give you the big idea right now, so we don't have to be in suspense. The big idea is that in Jewish law, as a reflection of Jewish philosophy, inheritance is not seen as an estate or land or whatever possessions being transferred from one person or one generation to the next person or next generation. That is not our understanding of the mechanism and the spirituality and therefore the mechanism of inheritance. The way inheritance works from a legal perspective is that instead of the field transferring ownership, the heir, the child or the heir, is considered to be an extension of the person that they're inheriting. So child is considered to be the continuation of the parents. In other words, in the shoes of the parents. So in other words, conceptually speaking, there's no transfer of property. Okay, a little controversial in this country. There's an inheritance tax. Should there be an inheritance tax? Should there not? But a tax comes in when you talk about a transfer of ownership, right? But from the Jewish perspective, there really is no transfer of ownership because the land is always in the same space. It used to belong to the child, to the parent. Now it belongs to the child, but that's only because the child and the parent are one. And ultimately, that concept is what we want to explore a little bit and apply that to our relationship with Israel and apply that to our relationship with God. That ultimately we're one, and that's the ultimately deepest connection. And it's deeper, it's unconditional, it's not dependent on what we do to maintain that relationship, etc. I mean, there's also other dimensions of the relationship that you want to maintain and you want to invest in, all good and all fine, just like parents and children. You want to maintain the relationship and make it one that works for everybody and is logical and is satisfactory for everybody. But on a deeper level, the concept of inheritance means that we're really one and the same, and that is something we want to explore a little bit. Maybe we'll read a little bit inside in the English, some of the Rebbe's commentary, and maybe we'll discuss it a little bit by heart. So we'll see what happens. Okay, so this is an essay from the Rebbe on the Parsha. We're just going to read a little bit in the English. Like I said, we'll read a little bit of chapter 4, a little of chapter 5, and then we'll discuss. We'll see how far we want to get. Okay. It is possible to explain the above. We're not getting into that right now. By first introducing the following concepts. The Torah relates the passage concerning inheritance as a continuation of the concept of the division of Eretz Yisrael, of the land of Israel, into ancestral heritages. In other words, once the Torah tells us about how to divide the land to the people entering the land, then the Torah goes on the next step and says, well, and then here are the laws of inheritance. Presumably, once you get the land, this is the system of the way it's transferred to the next generation. But what we see here is that inheritance in the Torah is described in continuation and in the context of inheriting the land of Israel. In response to the claim of Tzlafchad's daughters, grant us an ancestral heritage together with our father's brothers, God answered, beginning with the words, when a man dies without a son, with regard to the division of the land of Israel, of Eretz Israel, in addition to the general concept of dividing the land into ancestral heritages, there were three specific concepts involved. Okay, so now we're getting to, so inheritance in general in the Torah is a continuation from the discussion of how we divide the land of Israel to the Jewish people. So let's take a peek of how that is done. So we have three different methods. Number one, A, the land of Israel was granted to the nation of Israel as an inheritance and divided into ancestral heritage among the tribes. Okay, so it's classified as an inheritance in the Torah. That's number one. Number two, it was divided according to the pattern. To the more populous tribes, you shall give a larger inheritance, and to the less populous tribes, you shall give a smaller inheritance. Also in this week's parasha, right? So everybody inherits. But how much does each person inherit? How much does each tribe inherit? Well, it depends. If you're a larger tribe, you would get, it ended up miraculously, that we'll see there was the lottery. But miraculously speaking, you got larger tribes, more populous tribes got a larger share. So that is what we're going to call later the logical, pragmatic relationship with the land. And then there was specifically by a lot, should the land be divided, right? Because the Torah says you make a lottery. You take 12 names of the tribes, you put them in one box, you take the land, you divide it into 12, you put it into another box, you pull out this tribe, this portion, mazel tov. Okay, what does that really mean? What's really happening here? The implication is that in particular, there are three ways through which the connection between Eretz Israel, the land of Israel, and the Jewish people is expressed. And later we're going to say this concept is really a reflection of the three dimensions of our relationship with God. So in other words, A, it is as a heritage. Our connection to the land is it's our heritage. B, a division according to logic, to be more populous, to the more populous tribe. And C, a division according to the lottery. And now we want to understand why do we need all these three? What is the meaning of all these three? What does it represent? So that's what we're going to get to in a minute. What all these three dimensions represent. But just to summarize so far, we see that something is happening here. We see that there is multiple ways of dividing the land. And from the mystical perspective, the way you study the Torah, it's not just different ways of describing the same division, but existentially and spiritually, and maybe even psychologically, there are three ways we relate to the land of Israel. And that's an expression of three ways that we relate to God. One, inheritance. Two, logic. In other words, we do pragmatic, what makes sense. A larger tribe gets a larger portion, smaller tribe gets a smaller portion. And three, lottery. We have to figure out what we mean by the lottery. So all this will be explored in the next couple of minutes. And then hopefully we get something to go away with. Meantime, comments, questions, jokes, pushback, disagreements. Now was a wonderful time. Otherwise, we continue. Okay, so let's, yeah.
Quick question: does it relate to the three different ways we receive the commandments from Hashem? One without logic, one with logic, and one just given to us that can be directed for him. Yeah.
That's a good question. Let's read and see if those concepts align. Yeah, we discussed this last week that you have in the commandments, we have commandments that are logical, commandments that are illogical, and then commandments that are edut testimonials. Let's see. The short answer is I don't know. Let's see. In other words, let's see how this aligns. It's probably going to be a little bit different, but some overlap. Okay, just a little bit, just to help us transfer, just to help us to deal with the text that I'm reading. I want to read one more section inside before we start getting to the interpretation. One little section, because what we're going to say is that in our prayer, we talk about how lucky we are that we have a heritage of being connected to God, and we use three expressions. And what we're going to do is we're going to align those three expressions with what we're discussing as well. So let me just look for a second. Let me just find this. Sorry that this thing, you know, let me jump around first and then I'll help you. And then okay. So I'm just going to do one paragraph before we get to the interpretation. Here we go. We find that there are three expressions of the Jews' bond with God, as we say in our preliminary morning prayers. This is the prayer I'm focusing on. We are fortunate, how good is our portion, how pleasant is our lot, and how beautiful is our inheritance. Okay, that's the quote. We say it every day. I said it this morning. It's in the prayer book. Now, what do you see about this description of our praising our relationship with God? That surprisingly, there are also three expressions, and these expressions line up to based on the three descriptions that we had earlier. So when you read it the first time you read it, it's just poetic. You're just being redundant because that's what poetry does. You say a synonym, you say the same thing multiple times, and it makes everybody feel good, right? But we're going to say no. In Judaism, it's precise. If there are three descriptions of our relationship with God, it's because there are three elements of that relationship. And now we're going to see how it lines up. Likewise, there are three ways of describing the manner in which God granted granted Eretz Israel, the land of Israel, to the Jews as a portion, a lot, and an inheritance. Remember, these are the things. How we are fortunate. How good is our portion? Portion means it's my portion. I earned it. It makes sense that I get it. Lot is lottery, and inheritance is inheritance. So here you see that there are three. If it popped up in the parasha and it popped up in the prayer book, it's not by mistake. It's precise. And again, it's not just redundant. It's not just saying the same thing in different words, but rather that we're referring to three different descriptions of three different dimensions of our relationship with God. And here is what we're about to explore, and we're going to see how this impacts us in our own personal lives, which is obviously the point of everything. Okay, so we'll read a little bit more. Here we go. It can be said, and we want to start analyzing. The difference between our portion and our lot resembles the difference between a sale and a gift. A sale is dependent primarily on the money the purchaser pays for the item. By contrast, the gift is dependent upon the goodwill of the giver. He does not receive any payment from the recipients. Similar concepts apply regarding the divine beneficence bestowed upon the Jewish people. There are two general ways in which God grants his beneficence. A, as a result, for the observance of the mitzvot. This beneficence is elicited by man's divine service. In the lexicon of Hasidic philosophy of Hasidus, it comes from an arousal from below. And B, as a gift granted on God's own initiative as a result of his goodness, grace, kindness, and mercy, and an arousal from above. Let's stop here, analyze this before we continue. There are two ways why, in a relationship, if I'm on the receiving end, why I would receive something. Number one, we're going to say, I purchase. So I come to you and I say, can I buy something? You say, sure. You sell me your field, I give you money. Why did I get this field? I got this field solely because of I earned it. It's something that I did. I initiated this transaction. I paid for it, and therefore it's a result of my own efforts. In the language of Hasidic philosophy, if you want to, really the language of Kabbalah, if you want to talk about our relationship with God, it's called the arousal from below. We do something to initiate the blessing that comes from above. So certain blessings that I get in my life, why do I get them? I get them because I earned them. I did something, I was a good person, I made what the Kabbalists would call, I made a vessel for the divine blessing, and I earned this blessing, and I, quote unquote, purchased it from God. That aligns, the purchase aligns with the idea of chelek, of the lot. In other words, it's something that logically belongs to me because I paid for it. Okay, that's one element. The other element is a gift. You gave it to me. Why did you give it to me? You gave it to me not because of anything I did, but you chose to bestow it upon me. The Kabbalah would say you're giving from what they would call, that's an awakening from above. The person above, meaning the giver, gives to the recipient. It's not dependent on what the recipient did. And we're going to say with our relationship with God, in really every relationship has both elements. We talk about a spouse, talk about children. There are certain things you say, I'm going to give you, my child, I'm going to take you to the bicycle store because you earned it, because you got a 90 on your test, right? That's one class of transactions. You earn something, so you get it. You make your bed, so you get the allowance. On the other hand, there are certain things you give as a gift. You didn't earn it, but you get it. That's an expression of the love that you have to the person, and the person does not have to earn it. Now, could you have a relationship with only one without the other? No, right? Because if it's only what I earn, then it's completely transactional, right? If my wife says, could you help me? Could you take out the garbage? I say, well, you know what? I'm going to take out the garbage. You know why? Because last night you washed the dishes. Okay, so now you earned it, right? That's a transaction. That's not a relationship. So on one hand, you have to have the element of I do for you, you do for me. I earn it, you earn it. On the other hand, you have to have the unconditional element, which is the gift. I give it to a gift. I give a gift. And the gift is not dependent on what that person deserves. And in that sense, a healthy relationship must have both. And our relationship with God also has both. We do certain good things. We live a moral life. We get blessing. Blessings we get, we're undeserving. I say right away, I'm undeserving. I'm grateful. I'm undeserving. But God, in His kindness, gives it to us. And that's the two models. And this so far makes sense. We're going to get to the deeper model, the model of inheritance. That gets a little bit deeper. Okay, so I skipped a little bit to number 7, and here we go. Now, we're going to say, okay, fine. So what did we say so far? So far, we said that when you give me a gift, when I earn something, when I buy something, when I pay you money, when I earn something, it's because of me, because of the recipients. But when the giver gives a gift, it's because of the giver. That's true. But even so, you have to think about, who do you choose to give a gift to? You give a gift to, in the language of the Talmud, if the person would not make you happy, you would never give them a gift. In other words, even the gift, it's not random, but the gift is an expression of the pre-existing relationship. So let's see. Although a gift is initiated by the giver, there still exists a connection to the recipient. After all, is not a gift something that the giver grants to another person, the recipient. Moreover, the giver is attracted to the recipient. He grants the gift because the recipient generates satisfaction for him. Okay, so what are we saying? We're saying that there's two entities, and the gift represents the relationship between those two entities. And this is what I said all the way in the beginning. This is the key point that we're trying to get at. An inheritance represents a third and distinctly different concept. Inheritance does not involve giving something to a recipient. On the contrary, in a legal context, legal we mean in Jewish law, in the legal context, the heir is the embodiment of the person whose estate he is inheriting. That's what we said earlier. It's not that the estate transfers from person A to person B, from parent to child, or from any other person inheriting. No, legally, in other words, in Jewish law, the concept of an inheritance is that it's the same person. In other words, the heir is the embodiment of the person whose estate he is inheriting. He is not a separate person to whom the estate from his parent or relative is transferred. Instead, to borrow the wording of a verse, in the place of your forebears will be your sons. The heir assumes the position of the person whose estate he is inheriting because he is essentially one with him. Accordingly, as a matter of course, he assumes ownership of the property. In other words, even before you get to the mysticism, the legal perspective, if you're a child or you're the closest heir and you inherit, what happens is that is an expression of a certain truth that because you are an heir to this person, you have the same DNA, you in a sense are an extension of that person, and therefore you're the embodiment of that person. And like I said, the ramification would be a lot of legal ramifications. Ramification would be that we don't see it as a transaction. And because we don't see it as a transaction, there are many legal ramifications for that. For example, if you want to gift me a gift, let's say you're a nice guy and you think that I should get a gift. So you say, Menachem, I'm gifting you a gift. And what are you gifting me? Whatever. You're going to give me a little real piece of real estate in Greenwich. For whatever reason, I don't want to be in the real estate business. I don't want the headache. I say, sorry, I don't want it. Okay? You can't force me to accept a gift. If I don't want the gift, I don't get the gift, right? There's many reasons why I don't want a gift. Let's say I have a liability, okay? And I don't want my creditors taking my land. I don't want the creditors to take the gifts. So you're my friend. You want to give me your gift. But I know if you give it to me, my creditors are going to take it. So I say, I don't want the gift. It's not mine. So the law is you can't force me to accept a gift. If you give me a gift and I don't want it, it's not mine. Inheritance, it doesn't work that way. It's impossible to block an inheritance. Right? If I don't have any, if a relative dies and you're the closest in line, you inherit it automatically. I say, I don't want it because I don't want my creditors to take it or any other reason. I don't want it. Too bad. Because conceptually in the legal, I'm not talking American law, I'm talking about in Jewish law. In Jewish law, we don't see it as a transfer of ownership. Transfer of property, of ownership, you have to have the consent of the person, of the recipient. But if there's no transfer, then there's no consent necessary. And therefore, the moment the previous person passes on, the next one, I'm an embodiment, I'm an extension, it's mine. So this is a legal element of Jewish law of inheritance, but it represents a deeper spiritual point. And the deeper spiritual point is, if you get to the essence, parent and child are one. They're not two entities that have have different elements of the relationship, which was relationship number one is like a sale. You give your child what you earn. Fine. Relationship number two, you give your child a gift, or your child gives you a gift. Fine. That's all nice and well. Who initiates? Is it there's the initiation come from below, from the child or from the parent? That's wonderful. But what the first two elements have in common is that we understand that there's two entities, two distinct entities. And you have to have those first two elements because your child is a distinct entity from you in many ways, right? But if you get to the core, if you get to the essence, when you look at your child, or you look at the child looks at you, ultimately, it's an embodiment. Ultimately, spiritually, it's one essence. And that's where the inheritance comes in. And our big idea is going to be, that's also with God. So our relationship with God is not only because we do something, so therefore God gives us a blessing, or God gives us blessing because He's kind. So He's gifting us. That could happen too. But what those first two elements of the relationship have in common is that we're two distinct entities. But when you get to the deeper element, and you get to the element of inheritance, like we say in the prayer, how beautiful is our inheritance? If we inherited the Torah from God, if we inherited the land of Israel from God, what that's really telling us, not that God is dead, but what we're talking about, what we mean is that this type of relationship it's an essential relationship. It's not dependent on the child. It's not dependent on the parent. It is essential. It's on a soul level. And that's the deepest form of connection. And all forms of the connection are true, are necessary, are true, and are there. But that's that's one element as well. Okay, now we're going to tie it all up. I'll read it inside in English, why not? This is the novel and unique dimension that our relationship with God, described with the phrase, how beautiful is our inheritance, possesses, elevating it above the relationship implied by our portion and our lot. That's what we said in the prayer. We say how beautiful is our portion, our lot, and our inheritance. Our portion describes the Jew's connection to God, as God contracts and limits himself, as it were, to enable the divine service and the inherent virtues of the Jewish people to take on significance for him. However, with regard to God, to God himself, it is said, he has neither a son nor a brother. The description of the Jews as God's children applies to God only as he limits himself, as it were, to being described as father. What we're saying is like this. We're saying that there's a relationship with God where it's like a purchase. I do something, God likes what I do, and therefore God gives me blessing. What we're saying is, yeah, it's not accurate that God, it's accurate. God chooses to find value in what we do, but really God is infinite. It doesn't really matter. So that's a subject in itself. I don't want to go too much into it, but I'll just give you a little bit of an example. The example is a parent wants to relate to a child, but they have nothing in common because the child is 3 years old. So the child, the parent tells the child, okay, let's go play in the sandbox. And they're building castles together. And the child is all involved. And the child builds his father a beautiful castle. And the father says, I'm so moved. This is the most amazing thing that happened to me in my life. Now I ask you, does the father really care about the castle? No. If the other child in the sandbox made the castle, I wouldn't care, right? It's that parent places himself in the state of mind where this is meaningful. But really, it's not meaningful to them. So that's one form of relationship where God, who's infinite, says, you know what? I want a relationship with people. I want a relationship with my child. So I choose to see value in what they're doing. And that would be the idea of our portion, which means you get based on what you invest. Like the sale, you get the land because you gave the money. So that's one element of the relationship. Then we continue. Our lot, which reflects how he has chosen us, refers to the connection between God and the Jewish people that stems from the level within godliness and within the Jewish people where independent existence is of no significance. The Jews' connection to God is solely dependent upon God's free choice. In other words, here, it's like the gift. God chooses us. It's God will give us the blessing because he chose to do so. It's nothing to do with what we did. But then, by contrast, the third level, the description of our relationship with God as our inheritance, implies that the Jewish people are, as it were, intrinsically and absolutely one with God's essence. Israel and the Holy One, blessed be He, are entirely one. The bond between the Jews and God involves His essence, which transcends any conception of tzimtzum, contraction, and self-limitation whatsoever. Therefore, the connection at this level is referred to as our inheritance. In this instance, the ear becomes entirely identified with the one from whom he is inheriting because he shares the essence of that person. His individual identity is not relevant at all. It's all one entity. So I think we'll stop here, and just to summarize, just to try to make it a little bit more practical. You have the question of, I want to have a relationship with God, or I want to have a relationship with another person. So this can work both ways, because our relationship with other people is really an expression and a reflection of our relationship with God. Another question is, what is the meaning of a relationship? And do I have to earn my place in the relationship? And this could be a problem, because if it's a relationship over many days or many months or many decades, many years, many decades, the question is, okay, so I have to, every now and then, I have to really ask myself, what is this relationship based upon? Right? Just because we were in love 20 years ago or 30 years ago, does this still continue today? So I have to keep investing in that relationship on one level, right? So that is true. Every day I say, I have to invest in this relationship. On the other hand, a relationship is not a transactional, and therefore I expect also to give and receive in an unconditional way. So it shouldn't be dependent on what I do. If I say I'm in this relationship, I only get or give based on what I get or give. In other words, it's just transactional. You helped me yesterday, so I'll help you today. You earned this and I that. So you bought me, you spent $5 on my birthday party, so I'll spend $5 on your birthday party. That's not a relationship you want to be in either, right? So it has to be a relationship with both parties want to give unconditionally. And that's the idea of the second level, right? So this is lottery. So we didn't elaborate upon here, but lottery, according to Kabbalah, is where you say it's not logical. You're making this decision, it's not logical. Sometimes my commitment and this part and this relationship, certainly at this stage, may be illogical. Maybe I'm giving much more than I'm getting, but that's okay, because next year you're going to give me more than I'm deserving, right? So it goes both ways, but both parties are willing to go unconditional. So that's the model of the lottery. In other words, you have to have conditional, you have to have and then you have to have unconditional, and that's usually what we talk about, and that's usually what we discuss. But here we're talking about a deeper level. In some sense, some relationships run even deeper than that. And we say even unconditional means I want to give unconditional because I'm the giver and I want to give, and it makes me feel good, whatever the reason may be, but it's me giving to you. And here we say there's a deeper dimension of the relationship. A deeper dimension of relationship is that at the core level, at the soul level, it's not two entities, it's one. And this ties into what the Kabbalah says, that this certainly true about parents and children, but it also could connect to romantic relationships, where the Kabbalah says that male and female are really two souls, one soul that were separated and then reunite. So there's many obstacles, we're very different. We have a lot of bridges to build between us, and therefore we need multiple dimensions in the relationship. It has to be conditional, it has to be unconditional, all true. But ultimately, if we get to the soul level, then you ask yourself and you say, ultimately, we're one. And when I'm one is a very interesting thing that happens. What happens? What is one? What does it mean? I'm one with my child, I'm one with my spouse. What does it mean? What is the practical ramification of that we're one? What does that mean? So one practical ramification the Kabbalah discusses a very interesting phenomenon. Interesting phenomenon is that if I see somebody has a fault, some faults get me very upset. I get very upset. It triggers me, it bothers me. It just bothers me, it shakes me. Now, very often what happens is, I think this is true, not very often, but it's possible. It's not critical to what I'm saying, but I'll say it anyway, that sometimes the fault that I see in others that triggers me is the fault that I have within myself. And maybe that's why it gets me so upset. But either way, I see a fault in somebody else and it bothers me. Okay, now, an interesting phenomenon happens. When I see the fault in myself, it doesn't bother me. I know my faults, but I still love myself. So how come when you have a fault, it disturbs me, makes it hard for me to love you? But when I have a fault and I know my faults more than anyone else knows my faults, and yet that fault that does not bother me as much. It doesn't bother me. I'm still in love with myself. I'm still going to buy myself chocolate cake, even though I know my faults. The answer is because when you look at yourself, yes, you see your fault, but you see your fault against the backdrop of self-love, and the self-love does not allow that fault to bother you. So it's not that you don't know that it's there, but because of the self-love that it's engulfed in, it doesn't bother you as much. Now, if I look at somebody else in the relationship with me, and it could be a child, a spouse, whatever it may be, and I say, so don't you know you're the other person has faults? Of course they have faults. So how do you love them? Same way I love myself. Because in other words, when I have this dimension that we're one, so I extend the self-love that I have to myself to that other person. And therefore the fault, just like my own fault doesn't bother me, it doesn't bother the other person. So I could know you have a fault and I could still love you just the same way I love myself, even though I know I have faults. So that would be a practical expression of the idea that we're one. That just like my knowledge of my fault doesn't interfere with my self-love, my knowledge of your fault should not interfere with my love to you, because we're, in a sense, truthfully, we're one. Now, the truth of the matter is, like we have to reiterate a million times, every relationship has to have at least these three dimensions to be wholesome. And sometimes if you skip the more basic levels of the relationship, there could be room for abuse, etc. So we're not saying that we're just all going to become one and everyone will live happily ever after. But after you build on this relationship and each person gets the level of they invest and they are respected and they receive in return for what they invest, right? So I give in this relationship and I get, and I feel like that it's filling my needs, and that's why I'm here. Okay, that's level one. Then you get to the point where it's, okay, you can reach a level of unconditional. I'm giving more than I'm getting. Each party says that. And then you get to a deeper level, and you get to, if we get to the core, at the soul level, maybe we really are one. Maybe with two bodies with one soul, maybe with two halves of a soul that are united, and then the relationship is actually far more deeper. And again, this is true of our relationship with God, but also with people. A lot more to say, but this is just a little bit to get us thinking. Comments, questions, welcome. Otherwise, have a wonderful, wonderful day. Thank you so much for joining.
Rabbi, I have a question.
Yes, please.
You said that, since particularly in item number 3, well, we are one. You said that basically as we forgive ourselves, then we forgive the other person because we are one. Well, let me ask you this. A long time ago, Rabbi Noah Weinberg said to me, you know the golden rule? I said, sure. I said, love your neighbor as yourself. He says, well, do me a favor. If you don't love yourself, don't love me.
Right,
And
right.
is this: if we are one, the spouses tend to be harder on each other because, in a sense, if they set high standards for themselves, are they going to be inclined to be harder on their spouse than they would be on other people?
Right. So that's a very good, that's a very good point. And therefore it's dangerous to say we're one, right? We know this because we discussed this in our Kabbalah course. It's dangerous to say that we're one. You can't start at that point because one means then you have to like what I like, right? And if I like this for dinner, you have to eat it for dinner. And how come you have a different perspective, right? That could really rob the relationship of respect. And that's why you cannot start with level 3. Can't start with we're one, right? We have to start with 2 distinct entities. We're both here. We both respect each other. We both invest in the relationship. We both give and we both get what we need from this relationship. That's where you have to start. And if you skip that level, it's going to be negative on many levels, including being extra harsh, as you say. But after we recognize that we're 2 distinct people and we each have different needs, and therefore what being harsh on myself can be a motivator for myself, but being harsh to you is not going to be seen as motivation. It's going to be seen as critique, right? So that's very important to understand. You have level 1 and 2, but then you get to understand that on the soul level, I mean, not body level and not even on a conscious level, right? My personality is different than yours. We're not the same personality, but the DNA of our souls, we're one. And therefore, if you ask me, you know, sometimes you see a person and say, I don't understand how could somebody love this person? This guy has so many faults. And meanwhile, the spouse, if they're in love, they don't see the faults. Now, the conventional interpretation is love is blinding, but that's only works for a while, right? The love will be blinding for a few months, a few years. After a few decades, the love is no longer blinding. So how could you love someone who's not perfect? And I have a secret to tell you, no one's perfect. So how can I love somebody who, we use the example, doesn't matter what the example is. I'm going to use, I leave my socks on my floor. How could my spouse love me if I leave my socks on the floor? How could you do that? Well, I love myself despite the fact that I know that I have this fault. So what does that tell you? That tells you that if there's enough self-love, then the knowledge of a fault is not going to undermine the relationship. Why? Because it's me.
Well, Rabbi, let me just pick you up on that. If you don't have enough self-love, are you likely to be much more critical of your spouse?
Yes, of yourself. Let's start before you, of yourself. Self-love is a very important point. Self-love is the point that ultimately the fault, how does self-love work? How come when I have a fault, somebody else has the fault to trigger? I can't stand a person. When I have a fault, it doesn't bother me. Because when I see your fault, I define you by your fault. I say, this guy is such a terrible person. Look what he did, whatever that thing may be. When I have a fault, I say, I'm a very good person. I happen to have a fault or many faults, doesn't matter. I don't define, when somebody has a healthy self-love, so healthy self-esteem, they don't define themselves, or they shouldn't define themselves by the fault. That's a very important component. And the same idea is extended to somebody else. I don't define the other person by their fault.
The reality, Rabbi, is that for many people who I see in my practice, who are very critical of themselves, they're much tougher on themselves than they are on others.
Yeah. So being tough is okay because it could be okay. It could be okay if it's a motivator, right? But the point is what's beneath. If it's coming from a place of self-love and embracing the self. And I say, because I believe in myself, that's why I'm frustrated that I'm not able to carry out my potential, then being tough in certain areas, in certain ways, without being extreme, could be a motivator. But if they're being tough on themselves and putting themselves down as coming from a place of, I don't value myself, then that's very dangerous because you can't build on that. So you have to get to the point where I value myself, I don't judge myself, and I don't think my fault defines me. Once you have that, you can build on self-love, then you can build on relationship with somebody else, and then you could build on unconditional relationship with somebody else, and then you can realize that maybe that other person on a soul level is one. But remember, just like you can't go to level 2 before level 1, you don't, I always say this, you're not going to go on You want your relationship to be unconditional, but you're not going to date somebody and say, I'm looking for someone to love unconditionally. Then why are you dating the person to begin with? The whole idea is to see if it makes you feel good, if it feels right to you, if you're going to get something out of this relationship, right? So you don't start from the unconditional, you start from the conditional. And if you start from the unconditional, you will not 100% not have a good relationship, right? So you have to start with the notion that we're two people and we have a conditional relationship. But hopefully that conditional relationship grows and takes roots and expands. The root expands, and then it lasts even when in a moment right now, I don't feel like I'm getting something right this second. Okay, so I'm here, it's unconditional, right? Because the roots spread. So, but can't bypass level one. You have to start with level one, go to level two, and even in unconditional, I'm giving you unconditionally. You could then hopefully sometimes reach the feeling of level three that essentially we're one. Now, just because we're one doesn't mean our relationships are good or healthy or easy, right? We could have many times where people have our souls are related, parents, children, and we don't get along because level 1 and 2 is never addressed properly. So we cannot tap into 3. You ask me, I think the 3 is true. I think essentially we're one, but that doesn't help us because you can't go to the bank with the essence, right? The essence is the essence, it's the core. That doesn't necessarily mean you can access it. So you can't start with 3, you have to start with 1 and 2. Once you start with 1 and 2, hopefully you can touch level 3 as well, touch that deeper truth, but hopefully that is the deeper truth. But what I think the takeaway is that when we talk about any relationship, hopefully after this exercise, even if we don't have all the answers, we ask ourselves and we understand that the relationship is multidimensional. And just because I love you unconditionally, it doesn't mean I have to make sure, it doesn't mean I don't have to get anything out of this relationship. I can't go to level 2 without level 1. And just because I am engaging in the first 2 levels, I have to see at the core is inheritance, we're one. And that's really the essence of a relationship with people, with God. And we started this with the land of Israel because our relationship with Israel was a reflection of the relationship with God. So that's the story in short. Go ahead, Vicky, please.
Oh, thank you, Rabbi. That was very useful and practical and mystical talk and conversation. I just want to comment on your conversation with the doctor. I think if we are addressing in the same way our relationship with ourselves first, then our other relationship will be affected. On the same, I apply that same model, I think.
Right.
So understand that we inherit from Hashem a soul, and if we establish that relationship first, then other problems I think will be solved easier. But that's my my understanding of your conversation. But my question was a little bit different nature. So that was a very practical talk, but unfortunately not many of us on this call, and I don't know how many will listen to it. And if we engage with the relationship with somebody who will never listen to it, who will never internalize this idea, what do we do?
That's a good question. The first thing I would say is that we can always do this. You can. It's not always in our hands, right? We could do our part, but we cannot control the other person, and that's I don't want to say it's unfortunate, but that's reality. Even with our own children, we have to realize that we can only do our part. We cannot have a wholesome relationship with somebody who's not open to it. That's just a sad reality, and therefore you have to respond based on the circumstances. And you can't try to build a deep relationship with somebody who is not available for that at that moment. It could be a child, it could be a spouse. It doesn't really matter. So that is, we have to recognize the limitation of there were only one party, and that's what I was alluding to with you have to recognize the other person is different. In level number 1, the other person is different, and even number 2, the other person is distinct, and therefore I can't. It's not. I would be happy. I'll be the first one to say that in many cases I cannot make sure that the other person is here and investing in the relationship what I am investing. But I do think that even if my child is not in tune to this, I myself, if I have these tools to think about a relationship, I could tell myself, look, I'm going to my child's birthday party for level 1, 2, or 3. and I have more tools to think about what the relationship is for me. Forget about them for a second. Even from my perspective, what am I getting out of it? I may be getting out of it something on number one. I may be getting that I feel like I'm giving unconditionally, which is also a need of certainly of a parent, and certainly people in general. We want to transcend ourselves and give unconditionally. And then sometimes it's a reflection of level 3. So even putting that other person aside, again, I cannot manage a relationship alone. The other person has to be willing and open, etc. But even if the person is not doing what they do, I do what I want to do, that's fine. But then I have the tools to see within myself what need or what aspect of my soul is this action reflecting. And sometimes the answer is don't go to the birthday party at all. Sometimes it's go because of level 1. Sometimes it's because you're going to get something out of it, if you will. Sometimes it's go to the birthday party because of level 2, because you want to give unconditionally. Sometimes you want to go, say you're going to go because just an extension of the fact that we're one. And sometimes you're not going to go because the experience will be too painful. All good and all fine. I'm not telling you what to do, depending on the situation and the person. But the answer is, even if I'm going and the other person is totally tuned out, I still now have tools to look at a relationship from multiple levels. That's what I would say. Maybe the doctor wants to add.
I want to add something different, Rabbi, if I may.
Yes, please.
Very profound point about the fact that our ability to be loving to someone else, our ability to forgive, our ability to be compassionate, our ability to be benevolent, our ability not to be judgmental is based on our ability to treat ourselves that way.
Yeah.
On that, and what does Judaism have to say about the fact that one really shouldn't seriously date, certainly shouldn't get married until one's worked out these issues with oneself? Because if one goes into a relationship looking to fill a void or looking to feel about yourself, it's never going to work out. What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I want to get to that, but I want to just rewind for 1 second for what you said and reiterate what you said. You said you have to start with your own relationship with yourself, and I agree. Relationship with myself, because we talked about, you mentioned before, being hard on myself. To me, when you were saying that, what crystallized is, why do I value myself? So this too has multiple dimensions. I value myself because of what I achieve. But if it's only because of what I achieve, then that's going to be very fragile, because first of all, I have to constantly keep achieving to be able to impress myself, forget about others. So there has to also be valuing yourself unconditionally. But if I only value myself unconditionally, then I won't be motivated to do anything. So even within myself, how do I value myself? We have to start with logic. In other words, earn the relationship with self. Earn the relationship. You need some of that. You also need unconditional. And if you do one without the other or the other without the one, it's not going to be healthy. So that's number one. That's just to say that you're right. I agree, fully agree that what we're saying about somebody else also is about myself. The value of myself is number one, I earned it. Number one, it's unconditional. And then the number three, it's essential, right? So these are the three elements of myself. In a relationship with somebody else, I would say as follows. Again, I'm not an expert on relationships, so please don't proceed without seeking medical professional advice. On one hand, you're right that your person has to be willing to give and be healthy and mature to a degree where they're not going into the relationship because they need something, but rather they're going to give. And I fully agree with that. I also agree that I also think that I come from a culture where people get married relatively very young. So I wouldn't say that people are developed. And I think that if a person has the right attitude, they could try to grow together and help each other grow. But it's not that. But I agree that you can't come to a relationship because I need something. Because if you need it and that's the foundation, it's not going to work. So I agree with you, but I'm just expanding the conversation that it doesn't mean that if I say, "Oh, I'm ready, I'm perfect, we're ready to go," there's still room for growth and the dynamism within myself and within my partner. Each one has to grow on their own and growing together. This still can happen, but not negating what you said.
One further thing, Rabbi, in dating, if people are going on dates, how important is it for a Jewish couple, or perhaps for anybody else, to find out how much the other person wants to, has been able to, and is willing to give? If giving is, as you say, a prerequisite to the start for successful How much is that issue explored when a Jewish couple goes on a date?
I think it should be. I think it's a red flag if somebody, if you're dating somebody and you sense that they don't know how to do anything for somebody else that does not immediately come back to benefit them. So in other words, they're only operating on level one. There's no element of commitment. There's no element of being unconditional, which means I'm going to do something for somebody else without receiving something in return. If that's the person, then I think that's a red flag. You really want to think about it, because right now there's going to be times. Right now, the person is interested in you, and you're interested in them, and it's conditional. We're both gaining from the relationship. But I guarantee you that if you're married for an extended period of time, there could be a few days, a few hours, a few months, a few years. Doesn't really matter. There's going to be moments. There are going to be days where I'm going to say, I have no idea what I'm getting in this relationship, and the other person is going to say the same. And if you have to stick around enough to start seeing what I'm getting again, but in the meantime, there are going to be ups and downs. There are going to be moments that I say, what am I here for? And the answer is commitment. And commitment's another word for I'm maybe not getting anything right now, but I'm here for you because we have a meaningful relationship. And if a person is not capable of doing that, then that's a red flag, because I guarantee you there are going to be moments in the relationship that just relying on I get some benefits, you get some benefits, we're married, we save on the taxes, we save on the mortgage. That's not going to do it, right? Because there are going to be moments where I say, I'm not getting enough. I'm giving more than I'm getting. And there are moments that the other person is going to say the same.
Rabbi, if a young couple in an Orthodox, they go on some dates, what would be a question that a young couple might ask the other person to find out if the other person is a giver or a taker?
So that's a good question. It depends on where we're talking about, but sometimes in the Orthodox community, it's also people, this is the type of quote unquote research that families would do, right? Okay, this is a person, what did the person do with their time, et cetera, et cetera. So this is, ask their friends. In other words, even before you date, you want to look for somebody that has values that you think are compatible. So sometimes is asking a direct question is the way, and sometimes you could see the way the person responds. But I wouldn't say a direct question, but I say when you talk about your experiences, people share experiences. That's what they do. And part of sharing experiences is hearing what this person likes to do and what does the person do. And if it's all about things that are basically category one, I give, I get, then you say, okay, so where in your life you have to really see, you want to see experiences where a person could say, I went out of my way, I helped my grandmother, I went out of my way, you really want to see some of that when you talk about shared experiences. When you talk about experiences, I should say, and vote, yeah.
Very enlightening conversation.
Thank you, doctor. Thank you, Vicky. Have a wonderful day, and hopefully we'll meet again in good health.
You're teaching tomorrow, right?
We'll teach tomorrow. It's a fast day, so I'm not going to have a coffee. So I don't know. We'll see how much energy we have, but we're going to teach tomorrow. Yes.
I'm going to try to come to all three Wednesday every week.
Amazing. Okay. Thank you.
No,
Be well.
Are you going to follow up with Yaakov on what I said?
I'm going to reach out to him. Yes.
Makes sense, because I think we've got more to give.
I think so. Okay. Be well. Thank you very much.